He had been in power for less than 24 hours. Every member of his family was gone, killed in the same strikes that started this war, and his first act as the new supreme leader of Iran was not a speech. It was not a press conference. It was a single, deliberate decision that sent missiles flying toward Israel before the world even knew his name. This is not a story about a war that started. This is a story about a war that was supposed to end quickly and didn't. 10 days into this conflict, something happened that no civil defense manual had prepared anyone for. In Beit Shemesh, a residential city near Jerusalem, 9 people were killed. Not in the street, not near a military zone. They were inside a public bomb shelter, the reinforced structure that every Israeli family had been trained for decades to run toward the moment sirens sounded. The missile hit the shelter directly. 9 people dead, inside the one place they were told they would be safe. That single event changed something in the psychology of this war. When the place designed to protect you becomes the place that kills you, the entire logic of civil defense collapses. Israeli soldiers reported this week, through accounts that reached multiple media outlets, that their protected spaces near active military zones were damaged, overcrowded, or simply absent. Photographs circulated showing troops taking cover in open areas. Soldiers described arriving at shelters already filled beyond capacity. Others described protective infrastructure designed for a different era of missile threat, not for the precision and payload of what Iran is firing now. The weapons have evolved, the shelters have not. While Israel was absorbing the aftermath of the shelter strike, something equally significant was unfolding in the Gulf. Qatar's prime minister and foreign minister got on a direct call with Iran's foreign minister and said clearly, "Stop attacking us." Iranian strikes had hit near Qatar's international airport, near LNG industrial zones, near infrastructure that Qatar has spent decades building into a global economic landmark. The Qatari prime minister made one point with unmistakable clarity. A missile does not ask for identification before it hits a building. Iran's foreign minister responded that Iranian strikes were aimed at American interests, not Qatar. Qatar rejected that explanation entirely. But here is what matters more than the argument itself. Despite the attacks, despite the damage, despite the anger, Qatar announced publicly that it would not join the offensive war against Iran. Full stop. Qatar's former prime minister posted on X, publicly, for the entire world to read, Gulf states must not be dragged into direct confrontation with Iran. He warned that forces exist who want the Gulf to become embroiled, and that if they do, both sides will be depleted while other powers use the chaos to dominate the region under the pretense of helping. This is Qatar, the country that hosts the largest American airbase in the entire Middle East, saying, "This is not our war." Analysts at the Carnegie Endowment wrote this week that across the Gulf, the dominant sentiment is identical. They are being hit. Their infrastructure is being damaged. The carefully built image of the Gulf as a safe, stable destination for global investment is fracturing in real time. And still, they will not join America's offensive. The reason is not difficult to understand. These are small countries with enormous wealth and almost no strategic depth. If they openly join a war against Iran, they become permanent targets, not for the duration of this conflict, but for the next decade. Iran does not forget. Iran does not stop. Every Gulf leader understands that choosing sides in a war that America might eventually leave means living with Iran's retaliation long after American aircraft carriers have gone home. So America now finds itself in a position that deserves careful examination. It is fighting a war from bases inside countries that openly refuse to join that war. The contradiction is not subtle. It is structural. Meanwhile, the Houthi movement in Yemen, which had suspended its Red Sea operations back in October, made a public announcement this week through its leader. The phrase used was precise and deliberate, finger on the trigger, ready to intervene if developments require it. The Red Sea is not a peripheral detail in this conflict. It is the route that Saudi Arabia designated for rerouting oil if the Persian Gulf remained disrupted. It is the corridor that Asian LNG tankers would use to access alternative supply chains. It is the fallback option that global shipping companies have been quietly calculating for weeks if the Houthis re-enter this conflict, and they have stated publicly that they are prepared to do exactly that. That fallback option disappears entirely. And capital is already responding to all of this with its own kind of vote. Billionaires and major investors are moving money out of the Gulf. Bloomberg and the Financial Times have both confirmed the trend independently. Gulf states built their global appeal on 2 promises: security and tax efficiency. Security is now visibly compromised. When security goes, capital does not wait to see how the situation resolves. It moves at the first sign of sustained instability. It moves before the political outcome is clear. It moves because capital's job is to survive, not to be patient. The Gulf's data centers, logistics infrastructure, tourism development, and property markets are all exposed. A region that spent the last 10 years positioning itself as the world's neutral business hub is now an active conflict zone. The positioning cannot survive what is currently happening to it. On day 10 of this war, the President of the United States stood at a Republican fundraising event in Florida and described the conflict as a short-term excursion. He said American and Israeli forces were crushing the enemy in an overwhelming display of technical skill and military force. He claimed Iran's drone and missile capability had been utterly demolished. On that same day, the Times of Israel published first-hand accounts from Israeli soldiers describing inadequate shelters and troops taking cover in open areas. An Iranian missile killed 9 people inside a bomb shelter in Beit Shemesh. The New York Times reported that American military officials were surprised by the scale and duration of Iran's response. Surprised that Iran had kept firing this long and this accurately, with fewer missiles, but consistently better results. American officials briefed on the war told reporters they had not anticipated this level of sustained response. The president said overwhelmingly winning. His own military said we did not expect this. That gap is not a minor discrepancy in messaging. That gap is the distance between a political narrative being managed for domestic consumption and the actual military reality being experienced on the ground. 4 government officials briefed on classified war planning told The Intercept that the administration has no real endgame. The Washington Post quoted Iran scholar Karim Sajjadpour describing the strategy as regime change by jazz improvisation. The Intercept, The Washington Post, NPR, the London School of Economics, the National Intelligence Council, every independent credible institution is saying the same thing in different language. No plan, no exit, no clear path to the stated objectives. Now step back and look at the assumptions that built this war. The CIA assessed that killing the supreme leader would produce popular uprising and regime collapse. It produced a new supreme leader with personal biographical reasons to never stop fighting. The plan assumed the Iranian state would fracture under pressure. It has not fractured. The plan assumed the Iranian people would rise up against their government. Iranian security forces shot at people celebrating in the streets. The plan assumed a manageable replacement leader would emerge from internal power struggles. The assembly of experts voted the dead man's son. Everything the plan assumed happened in reverse. And the man who inherited that reversal is now in charge of a country that has already closed the Strait of Hormuz, set a Bahrain refinery on fire, removed $6 trillion from global markets, and driven oil prices to $119 per barrel, with a publicly stated target of $200. He took power less than 24 hours ago. He has already fired his first wave of missiles. He has nothing left to lose personally, and he leads an institution that has given him a mandate not to moderate, but to escalate. History does not judge wars by the speeches delivered while they are being fought. History does not grade the fundraiser remarks or the press conference confidence. History judges wars by the outcomes that follow, by what the world looks like when the dust finally settles and the accounts are calculated. The CIA's model predicted a specific outcome. The outcome that actually emerged is the opposite of every variable the model relied on. A new supreme leader, a unified Iranian security establishment, a Gulf refusing to participate, a Houthi movement with its finger on the trigger, capital leaving the region, 9 dead inside a shelter, soldiers without adequate cover, American officials telling reporters off the record that they were surprised. The man in charge of Iran got the job under conditions no leader should have to inherit. His family's graves are not yet 30 days old. He announced his leadership to the world the same way the men who killed his family announced theirs, with projectiles flying through the air toward targets that had no warning they were coming. He is not done. He has made that clear in the only language this war has spoken from the beginning. What happens next will not be decided in Florida at a fundraiser. It will not be decided by the narrative being managed for the cameras. It will be decided in the gap between what the plan assumed and what the reality has become. And right now, that gap is wider than any planner publicly wants to acknowledge. Wars do not end because one side declares victory loudly enough. Wars end when the conditions for ending them actually exist. Right now, none of those conditions exist. The new supreme leader has already made his first move. The question is not whether he will make a second one. The question is what the world will look like when he does.